There's an ancient proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. From time immemorial, teachers of the way of Jesus have likened apprenticeship to a kind of spiritual journey. A long, winding journey of becoming a person of love in God. And like the proverb says, it is a journey that we were designed to go on together in community. Today we come to our final session. But to say it again, this course is just a primer. You have a lifelong journey of following Jesus ahead of you. But before you go, we need to key in on one final idea that is of the utmost importance. You are not meant to go on this journey alone. You are meant to follow Jesus in community. We started this course with Jesus' invitation in Mark 1. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. Then we read, at once they left their nets and followed him. Notice, Jesus did not have an apprentice, singular. He had apprentices, plural, meaning Jesus' invitation was to come follow him in community. Just a few pages later, we read this. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him. Why 12? Why not 21 or 100? Because this is a highly symbolic act. Jesus is intentionally naming 12 disciples to evoke the 12 tribes of Israel. It's Jesus' way of saying he is forming a new family. What we call the church is not a building or an event. It is a new family, not based on blood, but on apprenticeship to Jesus. Just a few sentences later, we read this. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. Who are my mother and my brothers? He asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. The word Jesus used for brother and sister is adelphoi in Greek. It literally means sibling. It comes as no surprise that in the writings of the New Testament, the word adelphoi is the only other moniker used just as frequently as disciple. The Apostle Paul uses adelphoi over 130 times in his letters. One of the main ways Paul and the New Testament writers explain Jesus' work is through the metaphor of adoption. Through Jesus, we have been adopted into the family of God. God has become our Father, Jesus our older brother, and our fellow apprentices have become our siblings. When my wife and I adopted our daughter Sunday, she became both our daughter and Jude and Moses' sister. She became part of a new family. In the same way, to become an apprentice of Jesus is to become a part of a new family, one that transcends all the lines that divide us, race, class, gender, politics, all of it. Meaning, and please listen, Jesus desires not just to form you into a person of love, but to form a community of love. Now, this has all sorts of implications for our apprenticeship to Jesus. You can't follow Jesus alone. Not you shouldn't, you can't. The whole point of the spiritual journey is to become a person of love. Jesus called love the greatest commandment. Dr. Todd Hall of Rosemead School of Psychology calls the Christian faith a relational spirituality by which we are loved into people of love. This means that spiritual formation is a relational process at its core. You simply won't get very far in your spiritual journey if you try to go it alone. Dr. Joseph Hellerman put it this way: spiritual formation occurs primarily in the context of community. Persons who remain contented with their brothers and sisters in the local church almost invariably grow in self-understanding, and they mature in their ability to relate in healthy ways to God and their fellow human beings. This is especially the case for those courageous Christians who stick it out through the often messy process of interpersonal discord and conflict resolution. Long-term interpersonal relationships are the crucible of genuine progress in the Christian life. People who stay grow. People who leave do not grow. This is why church is so essential. But by church, I don't just mean church attendance. Sunday worship is a crucial part of our formation. But while God works through all shapes and sizes and styles of churches, it's usually in the smaller, more relational spaces where we experience the most profound change. There is a growing body of research from the social sciences that groups relationships into different categories based on group size and the depth of vulnerability. One of the most widely accepted paradigms is from Dr. Robin Dunbar of Oxford. It's called Dunbar's number. He calls our inner circle our intimates. This is 1 to 5 people max, who deeply know us as we are, our shadow and our light, and who, ideally, love us as we are. Of course, many in the West have no intimates, the fallout of Western individualism and the breakdown of the family. But hopefully, you have a few people you can bare your soul to, a spouse or best friend or mentor. The next circle is our friends, which goes up to 15 people. This is the people we do life with. We practice the one another's of the New Testament. We help each other move, we go on vacation together, we share meals, we drop off groceries when people are sick. This is our community. The next threshold is around the 150-person mark. Sociologists call this the law of 150, as 150 is about the maximum number of people we can be in relationship with, and it's the optimal group size for human organization. While there are some very large churches, this is also about the size of most local churches, and we draw on this wider social network for all sorts of things. This is our village, per se. The final circle is our tribe, the larger group we identify with and belong to. We don't know all these people personally, but this group is where we get a vision of life and a call to live with meaning and purpose. For many in the secular world, this could be a company or political party or a sports team. For us as followers of Jesus, this is the Church of Jesus. And when it comes to our spiritual formation, we need relationships across all 4 circles. Jesus had relationships at every layer. He had 3 intimates, Peter, James, and John. He had the 12 and a few close friends like Mary and Martha. Then he had the group of 120 in Jerusalem. Then the larger church that he left behind. Healthy people have relationships in all 4 circles. But our deepest formation, growth, healing, and change all happens in the smaller circles. We all need what Celtic Christians called an anam cara, or a soul friend, to bear our most vulnerable burdens with. C.S. Lewis once said the essence of friendship can be summed up in the phrase, "You too?" Meaning friends come together around a shared joy like backpacking or surfing or reading fiction. In a spiritual friendship, the shared joy is Jesus. And we need a community to do life with. We were created to live deeply relational lives. And it's in the first 2 circles of our closest community that we experience deep, lasting transformation. And yet, we all have mixed feelings about these deep relationships. Part of us aches for connection to God and to others. We desire to know and be known, to give and receive love. But part of us is terrified of connection, especially if in our childhood we did not receive safe, steady love from our parents or caregivers, or if we've been deeply wounded along the way. The therapist Susie Hausch once said, "Our deepest wounds come from relationships, but so does our deepest healing." These deeper relationships are essential to our healing and growth. And yet, in our modern world of radical individualism, digital distraction, and transience, These types of relationships will not just fall on our head. They will require us to make an intentional effort. So, before we go, let me name what these relationships look like. Spiritual friendships are marked by 3 core characteristics. The first is depth. These are not superficial relationships where we chat about the weather or our work projects or what show we're watching on TV. We talk about what's below the surface. We talk about our life with God, our pain, our suffering, our sin, where the growth edge is in our formation. But it's not just depth, it's also vulnerability. We come together around our weakness, not just our strength. We are raw, honest, and transparent with each other about what Jesus called our spiritual poverty. There are 2 parts to this. One is telling the truth, or the practice of confession, naming our sin and shame to one another. We can't live without sin, but we can live without secrets. The other is listening deeply to each other's stories and struggles. Neurobiologists tell us that when people feel felt, when they feel listened to in a compassionate way, it's indistinguishable from feeling loved. As we listen deeply to each other tell our stories and help each other make sense of our stories in God, we experience real healing from both sin and shame. Finally is a commitment to transformation. When monks join a monastery, they take vows, one of which is called conversatio morum, or conversion of life, which is essentially a vow to lifelong spiritual formation, to never stop growing. Many people reach a certain level of spiritual maturity and then plateau. Okay, I'm good now. But as apprentices of Jesus, we come together not just to be a safe place to process emotional pain, but ultimately to give ourselves more deeply to Jesus. This means part of our relational dynamic is telling the truth to each other. I need people to both comfort me and confront me at times, to point out my potential and also any pitfalls. And while I rarely need a full-on rebuke, I regularly need people to speak hard truths into my life. Spiritual friendships do not work if one member is not fully committed to the transformational journey. Depth, vulnerability, and a commitment to transformation. Here's the thing. It's possible to go to church every Sunday and even be in a small group, but never have these types of relationships. I was in the church for years and never had any relationships like this. I never let anyone get that close. When I first woke up to Jesus' call to community, I started small. Our family began to share a weekly meal with a few other people. Then some of them moved into our neighborhood and we started doing life together, watching each other's kids, going running together, throwing block parties, going on vacations. Then we started to confess our sins to each other. Eventually, we started living by a rule of life together. We kept going to church on Sunday, but most of our life together wasn't around a stage, it was around a table. And as romantic as that may sound, we had to learn the hard way about what Dietrich Bonhoeffer called the wish dream of community. In his book, Life Together, he writes, "Those who love their dream of a Christian community more than they love the Christian community itself become destroyers of that Christian community, even though their personal intentions may be ever so honest, earnest, and sacrificial. No actual church or friendship can possibly live up to the wish dream of the ideal church or friendship." Honestly, I can tell you, after many years of living in community, it is not easy. And when it goes wrong, it's incredibly painful. But when it goes right, it's a glimpse of eternity and time. Living in community has changed my life. I will never go back to just going to church on Sunday and living like an American individualist the other 6 days of the week. If you want to go far in your spiritual journey, cultivate a community of depth, vulnerability, and commitment to transformation, and follow Jesus together.